What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Young Guns podcast. And today we'll be talking about the Pierre-Luc Dubois versus Darcy Kuemper trade that just happened this afternoon. So obviously we're a little bit late on this video. I do apologize for that, guys. We were a little bit busy today, so we couldn't record it during the day. But we're getting this out to you right now. So let's just jump right into it. Darcy Kuemper going back to the LA Kings. He played there a little bit during his career in 17-18 when he was there with the LA Kings, winning 10 games, losing one, and then three overtime losses, and had a 932 save percentage. For Pierre-Luc Dubois, who had a really down year last year with the LA Kings, after being traded from the Winnipeg Jets to the LA Kings last summer. So, what happened? Why was this deal made? What was the reasoning behind this trade? Well, you know, to answer your question, or to answer the question, to be honest, I think it's one of those things that it was just two teams looking to move on from guys that were, underperforming. Right? You've got Darcy Kuemper, who had a down year last year, an 890 save percentage, 13 wins, 14 losses, three overtime losses. Not the best in terms of his numbers, really struggled last season, playing for the Washington Capitals, lost his starting job to Charlie Lindgren, and ultimately at the end of the day ended up becoming the backup. Didn't even get to play in the playoffs as well for the Capitals. So there was clearly something off with him last season. And so for that reason, when it comes to Darcy Kuemper, there needed to potentially be a change of scenery there. And there is. The Caps end up moving him to the LA Kings, and hopes to maybe see for Darcy Kuemper to see if he can find himself, his game again after last season. For Pierre-Luc Dubois, this is a player that, was traded last year from the Winnipeg Jets to the LA Kings in a blockbuster deal that sent Rasmus Kupari, Alex Iafallo, and Gabe Vilardi over to the Winnipeg Jets. And obviously for Pierre-Luc Dubois, there was a big expectation. He signed an 8-year deal at $8.5 million. And the expectation for Pierre-Luc Dubois was he was going to come in, he was going to play, he was going to be a difference maker for LA, and he was obviously going to potentially be, their first line center at some point in the near future for them, once Anze Kopitar, called it quits and decided to retire. And it just didn't work out for him this season. 16 goals, 24 assists, 40 points. 70 penalty minutes, -9, and then the playoffs, 5 games played and 1 goal. He just didn't look right. It didn't look right for him. He struggled. Even with the coaching change, they had Todd McClellan in at the beginning of the season. He didn't look very good. Jim Hiller came in. It didn't really help for Dubois. He was playing on the fourth line at times during the season. It just felt like it wasn't working in LA. And, at that point, I think it's a little bit too early. Like, you look at where the LA Kings were at and what they traded for him. I think, to trade him after a year, in a season where he had a down year and he had 40 points, I think is very, very surprising. I didn't think that the LA Kings were going to trade him that quickly. I thought they were going to give it a little bit more time. But, I think at the end of the day, this is a guy that, I think needed a change of scenery again, which is kind of funny to say considering, we've said that for a little while, but I just don't think that LA was the right fit for him. I think this season showed that. Could he have improved and maybe played better next season? Who knows? But with the way he played this season, I just think the LA Kings were like, you know what, if we can find a way to move him, we will. And it looks like they did. And so I think for that, it's very interesting. But just, going back to, Darcy Kuemper a little bit, like, this is a goalie that has never had below a 900 save percentage at any point in his career, apart from the one time in 17-18 when he played 10 games for the Yotes and had an 899 save percentage. That was the only time in his NHL career that he had lower than a 900 save percentage. And this season was the worst season he's had. Right now, you have to also understand this guy's 34 years old. He's at a point in his career where, he's getting up there in age. And with goaltenders, it's a very interesting situation because goalies tend to, regress and improve as seasons go along. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the older you are, it means that necessarily that you're gonna, regress. But in Darcy Kuemper's case, last season played a big factor for him. He struggled with injuries. He came in and he just didn't play well. It just was one of those things that it was like every time he played a game, it just felt like the Capitals were going to lose it. And then sometimes they would end up winning it. And you're like, okay, they won that game, but they probably shouldn't have. Well, Kemper just wasn't it last year. And I think that a lot of it had to do with, yeah, the Capitals defense, but I think also just his play wasn't good enough. And I think for him, I think it was time for him to go. And I think after losing that starting job, it puts into perspective that, okay, maybe this guy just, needed a change of scenery and needed to go somewhere else. Obviously, you know, it ends up being a situation in LA, which is very interesting because the LA Kings need a goaltender, right? Cam Talbot is, unrestricted free agent. Phoenix Copley is an unrestricted free agent. So next season, right now, your goaltending tandem looks to be Darcy Kuemper and David Rittich. And Rittich had a really good, end of the season. Played really well for the Kings down the stretch, and it puts a position for the LA Kings that looks pretty good now. In net, you have a goaltender in Darcy Kuemper for the next 3 seasons at $5.25 million. And you have David Rittich, which likely means that Cam Talbot and Phoenix Copley are going to walk and not be brought back, which I think is okay. If you look at your goaltending tandem, to have $6.2 million locked up in 2 goaltenders is not bad. The question for LA, I think, is going to be, is Darcy Kuemper going to return to form and go back to the goaltender that he was 2 years ago with the Colorado Avalanche? Or is he going to regress and start struggling again and being the goaltender that's might not necessarily be in the league in the next 2 to 3 seasons? So who knows? I'm optimistic. I think what's good about Darcy Kuemper is, he's, like I said, he played for the LA Kings and he was very successful in his tenure with the LA Kings, which I think is going to bode well for him because he's familiar with the team. He's familiar with the franchise. He's been in the area and he was in a location that he played really well in. I think it's going to be interesting to see what he does. And for the Kings, I mean, it's one less problem to deal with now, right? You don't have to worry about getting a goaltender. You've got one. Now you can focus on building the rest of your roster. And the other thing, too, about the Kings that's very interesting is they save cap space. They saved $3 million in cap space this season, and they move on from Pierre-Luc Dubois' contract. Now, what does PLD bring to the Capitals, and what's the interesting part about this? Well, Pierre-Luc Dubois is an interesting player, right? Obviously, with the Columbus Blue Jackets, it didn't work out for him. He wasn't happy there. He didn't enjoy his time. And he requested a trade and he wanted out. He goes to Winnipeg and he plays better hockey in Winnipeg. And it felt like he had found himself a home with the Jets. It felt like, this was finally the time for him to go and really, step up and become a really good player for the Winnipeg Jets. And, he had a career year, 73 games played in 22-23, 27 goals, 36 assists, 63 points. And he had back-to-back 60-point seasons. And you're like, okay, this guy's going to probably break out at some point. And then, he gets traded in that deal for Iafallo, Kupari, and obviously Gabriel Velarde after asking for a trade. And he goes to LA and he really, really digresses. And you're like, okay, what happened here? I think there's a lot of belief in Pierre-Luc Dubois. I know that, he's had some issues with character and, it hasn't always worked out. And obviously, it's just going to be his fourth NHL team in 8 years. Like there's definitely some concern there in regards to, Pierre-Luc Dubois and where he's at in his career at this point. But this is a guy who's 25 years old, right? He's going to turn 26 on June 24th. And like, again, like this is a guy that's hitting the prime of his career. Like if the Capitals are going to get the best seasons out of Pierre-Luc Dubois, it's going to be right now. Right. So I think for Pierre-Luc Dubois, it's an interesting situation because this is likely what the best he's going to be is going to be this. So these next 2-3 seasons are really going to determine, what type of player he's really going to be in the NHL. And what's interesting about Pierre-Luc Dubois is he's going into a situation that's a little bit similar to LA, but not necessarily, right? In LA, you had a lot of really good young talent. With Anze Kopitar, with the veterans leading like Anze Kopitar and Kevin Fiala and Victor Arvidsson, but you also had Quentin Byfield. You had, guys like Brant Clark who didn't really play much, but you had Arthur Kaliev who, had time in the NHL, and obviously Alex Turcotte. But then at the same time, you also had a lot of veteran presence with, Kopitar, Fiala, like I said, Adrien Kempe, and obviously Phil Danault. In Washington, what's interesting is they're kind of an interesting team because, they have a lot of older guys in Alex Ovechkin and Tom Wilson, but they also have guys coming up in Connor McMichael, Hendrik Lapierre, Ivan Miroslachenko as well, and obviously Ryan Leonard, who they haven't signed yet, but I would expect him to play. So the Caps' future looks pretty interesting. And to bring in a guy like Pierre-Luc Dubois, who, is 25 years old, going to be 26 in in June on June 24th, you're bringing in a guy who's going to be in the prime of his career, and you're going to bring in a guy who's going to be able to mentor the young kids and is going to be able to play in your top six and likely be able to be a pretty good producer for you. So I think that there's definitely a lot of positives to this deal for the Capitals because yes, there's a risk. Obviously, with the $8.5 million cap hit for the next 7 seasons, this guy needs to pan out. Like there's no question about it. But it becomes a situation of this is a guy that can play in your top six for years to come. You don't have to pay him, right? Like you don't have to sign him as a free agent. He's already signed. He's got a no move clause, so he's not going anywhere. So you kind of have no choice but to make this work. And on top of it, he's probably going to get to play with the greatest goal scorer of all time and help him reach that peak of, scoring, beating Gretzky's record. So there's a lot of positives to look into this when you're a Washington Capital fan, but also when you're Pierre-Luc Dubois, right? And it's an opportunity for him to finally showcase the type of player that he is. Now, obviously there needs to be some improvement in his game. He needs to change the way he plays. He needs to have a really good offseason. He needs to come into camp and really absolutely be lights out. But Capitals fans should be optimistic because if Pierre-Luc Dubois can turn into the player that he was with the Winnipeg Jets in 2021-22 and in 2022-23, you're getting yourself a player that is going to be a difference maker for your hockey team. And that's a really good price to pay, especially when it's just giving up a goaltender who struggled. Right. And for the Capitals, they could afford to make this move because, they can afford to make this move in the sense that you look at this team on paper, right? They've got cap space to work with. I mean, they've only got $3 million in cap space right now projected. They're probably going to have, some guys that they're going to need to sign in Connor McMichael, but ultimately, like their squad is pretty much built, right? They can maybe move on from some guys here and there, but you've added a guy in Pierre-Luc Dubois without having to give up any young talent or any prospects or anything of the sort. And yeah, you take on an additional $3 million in cap space for the next, 8 years, 7 years, but you're getting a guy that's going to be locked in for your future. So they took this deal and went, you know what, we're going to be able to do this. We're going to take him on and we're going to hope for the best. And with the cap going up in the next couple of years, it's a deal that's not going to look as bad towards the end of it. So at the end of the day, it's a risk worth taking for the Capitals. The other thing that's good about the Capitals is if you're paying attention to the Hershey Bears, they don't really necessarily need a goalie. I mean, Hunter Shepard and Clay Stevenson have played really good hockey in the AHL. Hunter Shepard having played a couple of games for the Capitals in the NHL level. I think they're ready for them to have one of the two play in the NHL next season. I think that's the reason they signed Hunter Shepard to an extension early on in the year. So I do think the Capitals are going to roll with probably Charlie Lindgren and Hunter Shepard, maybe get a third goalie in there just to kind of like mend the fort a little bit in case, one of the two goes down. But with how well the Hershey Bears have played in the AHL and how dominant they've been for the last couple of years, I think the Capitals can afford to trade away a guy like Darcy Kuemper and rely on a guy like Charlie Lindgren. Will it backfire? I mean, who knows, right? Charlie Lindgren's never really been a starter in the NHL apart from this season where he took over the role. But besides that, I think there's definitely an opportunity in terms of, being able to do that and be dominant in that regard. So I do definitely think that there's a good trade to be looked at and a trade partner. And obviously, we'll see what happens in that regard for the Capitals in terms of, whether they're going to be able to, find some success in this deal. So obviously, guys, please let us know in the comments down below what you think about this deal. And thank you guys for watching. We'll see you guys in the next episode of the Young Guns podcast. Peace.